So is it possible, since you weren't there to actually see it happen, that it was Emily and not Chris who removed the Colt from the safe? It's possible, James said. You bastard. Gus stood in front of the shoji screen, her arms crossed. You selfish, rotten bastard. All the defense has to do to vindicate Chris is present a reasonable doubt, and that your testimony as the owner of that gun would almost single-handedly do that. She grabbed the earring box out of Gus's hand and threw it against the wall. What do I have to do to make you see me? She cried. Kill someone? Gus slapped Kate across the face. Hello and welcome back to another episode of our book club series. So, if y'all didn't notice last time, I am painting my room, which is also why my nails are like all over the place. But I did finish this wall, which is exciting because I watched when I was editing. Okay, lay down. Okay, lay down. When I was editing my last video, it was bothering me so bad that this wall was not done. So if you watched the last video, then you saw that I am in the process of painting my room. So I did finish this wall because I couldn't handle it anymore. But yeah, I'm still in the process of painting my room. So there's some, well, it's really not that bad in the background, but there are some things like randomly misplaced. Anyways, so if you're new here and you don't know who I am, my name is Brooke. I do all types of different content on my channel. What you are watching right now is our book club series. We are reading The Pact by Jodi Picoult. We read chapters of the book together, and then we discuss our theories about what we think is going to happen, the drama, the characters, and all that fun stuff. So if you enjoy books and book discussions, then stick around because you'll definitely enjoy this type of content. If you'd like to catch up to where we're at right now in the book club series, I do have a playlist on my channel, so you can go to my playlist, and it's called Book Club The Pact, and all the videos are listed in order on that playlist. So if you want to go back a few and maybe watch a few of them just to kind of catch up to where we're at right now, or if you want to binge watch, if you need something to binge watch in the background, I don't know, while maybe you're painting your room and you need something to binge listen to in the background, you're more than welcome to go to the playlist and just hit play and listen to them all in order. If you just really are dying to cringe, go right ahead, be my guest. But anyways, so yeah. Also, you can search the hashtag book club series, and all the videos will pop up there as well. If you're new here, I always do a little recap at the beginning of the video of what we went over at the end of the last video, just so that we're all on the same page with where we're at in the book and what's going on. So I'm going to go ahead and get right into that. Something that I forgot to mention last time in our discussion was that Chris we don't know for sure because you never know for sure until you're like in a situation, but Chris may have been okay with if he had known about the baby with Emily getting an abortion. Like, he may have been okay with it, because I'll read you the quote. So, like, when he finds out about this, and he's, like, about the fact that she was pregnant, right, when she died, he's thinking to himself, he's like, maybe Jordan had been right. The pregnancy had been the thing that made her so depressed. But why? They could have gotten married and had the baby. They could have gone together for an abortion. Oh, fuck. I'm going to have to edit that out. Well, anyways. So, like, that's his internal dialogue. So he's thinking they could have gone together to get an abortion. So I guess we'll never really know for sure if he would have been okay with her doing that or not. But that is something that we found out last time that has not been said at all. In my own thoughts, I was just assuming that he would not have been okay with her doing that. So that's probably why she just went ahead and ended it all, because she didn't want to have to face telling him that she didn't want the baby. So she just thought her only way out was to end it all, instead of it even being an option for her to get an abortion if he knew about it, right? So I was thinking the same thing that she was thinking, that he would have never been okay with her getting an abortion. But here, clearly, we don't know that that's the case. So that caught me off guard. I don't know about you all, but I was surprised to hear that. I'm going to read like the last couple of sentences where we left off last time, and then we'll get into the next section. So here we go. So where we left off last time, Selena, the lawyer's assistant, goes into the abortion clinic and is trying to find out some information. Well, Stephanie, one of the nurses who worked with Emily, ends up spilling some tea to Selena, basically. And that's where we left off. So Selena and Stephanie are having this conversation about the last time that Stephanie, the nurse, saw Emily when she was alive. Okay, so that's where we're picking back up right now. So this is Selena, and she's saying, is it possible that you convinced Emily to tell him maybe after one of your visits? It's possible, Stephanie said, but every time I saw Emily, she said the same thing. She hadn't told the father. She didn't want to, and the last time I saw her was the day that she died. So that's where we left off. All right, now we're moving on to the next section. This just came off. Whoops. At the sound of the heavy barred door slamming shut, Dr. Feinstein jumped, leading Jordan to believe that it would not be all that difficult to convince the man not to come back. This way, doctor, Jordan said solicitously, directing the man toward the narrow staircase that led up to the attorney's conference room at the jail. The officer who unlocked the door smiled grimly, hitched his hands into his belt, and told them Chris was on his way. Interesting fellow, Jordan said, taking a seat in the small, stifling room. You mean Chris? No, the officer. He's the one who was held hostage here last year. Oh, Dr. Feinstein said, peering out the door. I remember seeing that on the news. Yeah, messy thing. Axe murderer who was waiting for trial led the uprising, and they locked the guy in one of the cells after they cut up his face with a razor blade. He leaned back, linking his hands on his belly and enjoying the way Dr. Feinstein's face leached of color. You remember now the conditions for this interview. Dr. Feinstein turned his head away from the door with effort. Conditions? Oh, yes. Although I will tell you again that my primary interest is healing Chris's mind, and there is a certain benefit associated with exploring the moment it was damaged in a now safe environment. Well, you'll have to go about your healing in another way, Jordan said flatly, no discussing the crime or the case. Dr. Feinstein rallied once more. Whatever Chris says is protected by patient confidentiality, he said. You really don't have to be present. Number one, Jordan said, patient confidentiality has been violated before in extreme circumstances, and murder one certainly qualifies as one of those. Number two, the dynamics of your relationship with my client comes second to my relationship with him. And if he's going to be putting his trust in anyone these days, it's me, doctor. Because you might be able to save his mind, but I'm the only one who can save his life. Before the psychiatrist could answer, Chris appeared at the doorway. A smile broke over his face at the sight of Dr. Feinstein. Hi, he said. I've had a change of address. I can see that, Dr. Feinstein chuckled, settling back in his chair with such ease that Jordan found it difficult to believe this same man had been shaking at the control booth only minutes before. Your attorney graciously arranged for me to have a private meeting with you, provided he's allowed to chaperone. Chris cut a glance toward his lawyer and shrugged. Jordan took that as a very good sign. He sat down at the last empty chair and flattened his palms on the table. Why don't we start with how you're feeling, Dr. Feinstein began. Chris turned toward Jordan. Well, I feel weird with him here, he said. Pretend I'm not, Jordan suggested, closing his eyes. Pretend I'm taking a nap. Chris scraped his chair along the floor, turning it sideways so that he wouldn't see Jordan's face. That's funny. At first, I was pretty scared, he told the psychiatrist. But then I figured out that if you keep to yourself, it's okay. I just try to ignore most everybody. He picked at the cuticle on his thumb. You must have a lot you want to say. Chris shrugged. Maybe. I talk a little to one of my cellmates, Steve. He's all right. But there are things I don't tell anyone at all. Attaboy. Jordan thought silently. Do you want to talk about these things? No, I don't, Chris said, but I think I need to. He looked up at the psychiatrist. Sometimes it feels like my head's going to crack apart. Dr. Feinstein nodded. I found out that we were going to have a baby. He paused, as if waiting for Jordan to swoop in, avenging legal angel, to say that this was too closely related to the case to discuss. In the silence, Chris nodded his hands together, squeezing the knuckles tight against each other so that the pain would keep him focused. When did you find out? Dr. Feinstein asked, his face carefully blank. 2 days ago, Chris said softly, when it was too late. He looked up. Do you want to hear the dream that I had? Don't psychiatrists like dreams? Dr. Feinstein laughed. Freudians do. I'm not a psychoanalyst, but go right ahead. Well, I don't dream much in this place. You've got to understand, the doors are slamming shut all night, and every few minutes one of the more obnoxious officers comes around on the catwalk and shines his flashlight in your face. So the fact that I slept deep enough to dream anything is pretty amazing. Anyway, I dreamed she was sitting next to me. Emily, I mean. And she was crying. I put my arms around her, and I could feel her shrinking away, into only skin and bones. So I hugged her a little tighter. But that just made her cry more, and curl up closer, and all of a sudden, she hardly weighed anything at all, and I looked down and saw that I was holding this baby. It's quite a dream. Jordan shifted uncomfortably. When he'd included himself in this private session, he had not thought beyond the point of protecting Chris legally. Now, he was beginning to realize that the relationship between a psychiatrist and client was very different from the relationship between a lawyer and client. An attorney only had to draw out the facts. A psychiatrist was obligated to extract the feelings. Jordan didn't want to hear Chris's feelings. He didn't want to hear Chris's dreams. That would mean getting involved personally. Never a good idea when practicing law. He had a fleeting vision of Chris, sucked dry on both accounts by Dr. Feinstein and himself, blowing away like a husk. Why do you think you had this dream? Dr. Feinstein was saying. Oh, I'm not done yet. Something happened after. Chris took a deep breath. I was holding this baby, see, and it was screaming, like it was hungry, but I couldn't figure out what to feed it. It kicked harder and harder, and I talked to it, but that didn't make a difference. So I kissed it on the forehead, and then stood up. And then I stood up and slammed its head onto the ground. Jordan buried his face in his hands. Oh, Christ, he prayed silently. Don't let Feinstein get subpoenaed. Well, a psychoanalyst would say something about you trying to return to the so-called childhood of your original relationship, Dr. Feinstein said, smiling. But I'd probably say it sounds like you were frustrated when you went to bed. I took this psych course at school, Chris continued, as if Feinstein had not spoken. I think I can figure out why Emily turned into the baby in the dream. Somehow I've got them connected in my mind. I even understand why I was trying to kill it. That guy Steve I was talking about, my cellmate, he's in there because he shook his baby to death. So that was already going around in my head too when I went to sleep. Dr. Feinstein cleared his throat. How did you feel when you woke up from the dream? That's the thing, Chris said. I wasn't sad. I was totally pissed off. Why do you think you were angry? Chris shrugged. You're the one that said that emotions all jumble together. Feinstein smiled. So you were listening, he said. In this dream, you hurt the baby. Might you be angry about the fact that Emily was pregnant? Wait a second, Jordan objected, aware that critical information was about to be revealed. But Chris wasn't listening. How could I be? He said. By the time I found out about it, it didn't make much difference. Why not? Because, Chris said sullenly. Because isn't an answer, Dr. Feinstein said. Because she's dead. Chris exploded. He slumped down in his chair and ran his hand through his hair. God, he said softly. I am mad at her. Jordan leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees. He remembered how, the day Deborah had left him, He'd gone to work at the DA's office and had picked up Thomas at daycare and acted as though nothing out of the ordinary had happened. And then a week later, Thomas had knocked over a cup of milk, and Jordan had all but skinned him alive. He who had never struck his son. Before he realized who he was really trying to punish. "Why are you angry at her, Chris?" Dr. Feinstein asked softly. "Because she kept it a secret," Chris said hotly. "She said she loved me." "When you love someone, you let them take care of you." Dr. Feinstein was silent for a moment, watching his patient gather control. "If she told you about the baby, how would you have taken care of her?" "I would have married her," he said immediately. "A couple of years wouldn't have made a difference." Do you think Emily knew you would have married her?" "Yes," Chris said firmly. "And what is it about this that scares the hell out of you?" For a moment, Chris was speechless. His eyes set on Dr. Feinstein as if he was wondering whether the man was a seer. A seer. So like a seer. So like a, what is that? Like a psychic? A seer? Seer. S-E-E-R. A seer. So like a psychic, I think is what Chris is thinking in his head. For a moment, Chris was speechless, his eyes set on Dr. Feinstein, as if he was wondering whether the man was a seer. Then he looked away and wiped his nose with the back of his hand. "My whole life was about her," Chris said, his voice thick. "What if her whole life wasn't all about me?" He bowed his head at the same instant that Jordan lurched to his feet and walked out of the conference room, breaking his own rules so he would not have to listen anymore. So Jordan's like, so let's just talk about what happened. Discussion time. So Jordan, the lawyer, right, was apparently not going to allow Chris's psychiatrist to have this meeting with Chris in jail without him present. Because he was afraid Chris would spill the beans, or he was afraid Chris would say something unexpectedly or, without meaning to, that would further incriminate him in this murder trial. So Jordan's like putting his foot down and not letting the psychiatrist meet with Chris without him present. I guess once he sits in on this meeting, he's like feeling like he's getting too emotionally involved, because he said this quote earlier about how he doesn't ever get emotionally involved with his clients, because then I guess it's harder to be neutral. If you're a lawyer, it's much harder to remain neutral if you really get to know your client emotionally. So watching and listening in on this meeting with Chris and his psychiatrist, and he's like feeling like he's getting emotionally involved and emotionally invested. He's like, I'm out, I can't do this, we're done. So he dips the fuck out of this meeting after insisting in the beginning that he be there. Moving on to the next section. The Hart's house was decorated, for the most part, in a serviceable New England WASP style that included spindly Chippendale furniture, threadbare antique carpets, and paintings off stiff-lipped subjects who were not related to the family. By contrast, the kitchen, where Jordan was currently sitting, looked as if several ethnic festivals had recently collided within it. Delft tiles decorated the splashboard of the sink. Colonial ladder-back chairs offset a marble-topped ice cream parlor. A shoji screen blocked off I don't know how to say this word, so I'm just going to guess. A shoji screen blocked off the doorway to the dining room. Rainbow-hued Zapotec Indian place mats surrounded a German Hofbrauhaus beer stein, which held a mismatched assortment of silverware and plastic utensils. The eclectic surroundings set off Gus Hart beautifully, Jordan thought. I'm about to have to kill this fruit fly because I can't deal. I cannot fucking deal right now. The eclectic surroundings set off Gus Hart beautifully, Jordan thought, as he watched her pour him a glass of cold water. As for James, he turned his attention to the man, hands shoved in his pockets as he stared out the window at a bird feeder. Well, he probably spent his time in the rest of the house. So it looks like Jordan, Chris's lawyer, is at Gus and James's house, who are Chris's parents. So Jordan, the lawyer, is the attorney, is visiting them. We don't know why yet, but that's the scene. There you go, Gus said, drawing up the second chair to the teeny round table. She frowned at its surface. Do we need to move? She asked. There isn't much room here. They should have moved. Jordan had brought a crate full of papers, but there was something about being in one of the more staid, conservative rooms that didn't appeal to Jordan. Not when it came to discussing a case that required nearly gymnastic flexibility. This is fine, he said, steepling his hands. He looked from Gus to James. I came today to talk about your testimonies. Testimonies? It had been Gus's question. Jordan let his eyes touch on her face. Yes, he said. We're going to need you as a character witness for Chris, who knows him better than his own mother. Gus nodded, her face pale. What do I have to talk about? Jordan smiled sympathetically. It was quite common for people to be afraid of going up on the stand. After all, every eye in the courtroom was focused on you. Nothing you won't have heard before, Gus, he assured her. We'll talk about the questions I'm going to put to you before the actual testimony. Basically, we'll cover Chris's character, his interests, his relationship with Emily, whether, in your esteemed opinion, your son could ever have committed murder. But the Attorney General, doesn't she ask questions too? She does, Jordan said smoothly. But we can probably figure out what they're going to be. What if she asks me if Chris was suicidal? Gus blurted out. I'd have to lie. If she does, I'll object, on the grounds that you're not an expert in teen suicide. So then Barry Delaney will rephrase and ask whether Chris ever mentioned anything to you about killing himself, to which you will simply say no. Jordan pivoted in his seat to address James, who was still looking out the window. As for you, James, we're not going to use you as a character witness. What I'd like to get out of you is the possibility that Emily might have taken the gun herself. Did Emily know where the guns were kept in your household? Yes, James said softly. And did she ever see you take one from the gun cabinet? Or Chris, for that matter? I'm sure she did, James said. So is it possible, since you weren't there to actually see it happen, that it was Emily and not Chris who removed the Colt from the safe? It's possible, James said, and Jordan broke into a smile. There, he said. That's all you'll have to say. James lifted a finger and set a stained glass Angel Sun catcher swinging in the window. Unfortunately, he said, I won't be taking the stand. Oh shit, so James just said he's not. The dad's like, no. Nope, not doing it. Excuse me? Jordan sputtered. He believed, until this moment, that the Harts would condone anything short of and possibly including bribery to get their son free. You won't take the stand? James shook his head. I can't. I see, Jordan said, although he didn't. Could you tell me why? The cuckoo clock on the wall came obscenely to life, its small dweller slipping out like a tongue 7 consecutive times. Actually, James said, no. Jordan was the first to recover his voice. You do understand that all the defense has to do to vindicate Chris is present a reasonable doubt, and that your testimony as the owner of that gun would almost single-handedly do that. I understand, James said, and I refuse. Fuck, I don't know what's about to happen, but this is getting interesting. So something I will talk about real quick, if y'all don't remember, was... So James and Chris, his son, do not have a good relationship. The vibe that I was getting, that I'm pretty sure we discussed in one of the videos earlier, was that James, the dad, basically expected Chris, his son, to be perfect, to kind of be like, you know, the jock, the this, the that, you know, good grades, kind of like the whole what's the word that I'm looking for? Basically that he expected his son to be perfect, but didn't actually care, like, how Chris feels or what Chris was going through. And so Chris Chris doesn't like his dad. Chris can't fucking stand his dad, basically. So just to give you a little background and a refresher for those of us that had already heard that, just a reminder, Chris cannot stand his dad. They do not have a good relationship. And now his dad's saying, we don't know why yet, but his dad is saying that he will not take the stand. I understand, James said, and I refuse. God, I fucking almost got that bitch. You bastard. Gus stood in front of the shoji screen, her arms crossed. You selfish, rotten bastard. Fuck. She walked up to her husband, so close her anger stirred the strands of his hair. Tell him why you won't do it. James turned away. Tell him. She whipped around to face Jordan. It has nothing to do with stage fright, she said tightly. It's because if James gets up at the trial, he cannot pretend that this was all a nasty nightmare. If he gets up at the trial, he's actively involved in defending his son, which would mean that there was a problem in the first place. Oh yeah, that's why. Because his dad won't admit that there's ever an issue with anything. He, like, doesn't acknowledge anything. Where have I heard that before? Which would mean that there was a problem in the first place. She snorted in disgust. And James pushed past her and left the room. Shit. I can't believe he wouldn't even, like, get up there just to defend his son. Like, your son is on trial for murder, and you are refusing to even, like, get on the stand and do anything you can to keep him out of prison for the rest of his life. Like, that's an issue, man. That's a fucking issue. Okay, fucking issue if you're in that bad of a denial. For a moment, both Jordan and Gus were quiet. Then she sat down in the chair across from him once again, her hands toying with the collection of silverware in the beer mug, making it clink against the ceramic lip. I can put him on the witness list. Jordan said, in case he changes his mind. So yeah, Gus is pissed as fuck at him because he is just kind of like, I'm trying to remember, I think he's like a successful doctor. Maybe it'll talk about it again, but it's been a while and I didn't go, if y'all want to know where we're at, go back, watch a couple videos, watch a few videos before this one, and so you can catch up. But I think James has I think he's a doctor. He has some kind of, like, really successful career where he doesn't want any negative attention on him because he's worried about his reputation. He's worried about his reputation. That's the only fucking thing some people care about. So yeah, so he's, like, basically this entire time refusing to do anything, to be involved in any way in this trial where his son can possibly end up in prison for the rest of his life for a murder that we really don't know if he committed or not. And James is like, doesn't want anything to do with it. Hashtag his reputation is at stake. Ugh. Alright. I can put him on the witness list, Jordan said, in case he changes his mind. He won't, Gus said. But you can ask me the questions you were going to ask him. Surprised, Jordan lifted his brows. You've seen Emily with Chris when he was getting into the gun cabinet? No, Gus said. Actually, I don't even know where James keeps the key. She scrubbed her thumbnail over the engraved design of the mug. But I'll say anything you need me to, for Chris. See, that's what you would think, like, a parent would be doing. But I'm just going to move on. But I'll say anything you need me to for Chris. Yes, Jordan murmured. I imagine you would. Next section. The unwritten rule in jail was that the baby killers got no peace. If they were showering, you threw things into the stall. If they were shitting, you walked in on them. If they were sleeping, you woke them up. As the medium security ward population dwindled, supposedly, the huge influx occurred after the Christmas holiday. The two prisoners who'd shared a cell with Chris and Steve were moved out. One was transferred to maximum security for spitting at an officer. The other finished his sentence and was released. With these cellmates out of the picture, Hector began anew his campaign to make Steve pay for his crime. Okay, backstory real quick. So Steve, who is Chris's cellmate, That's what they're talking about right now. Is the one who shook his baby to death. So that's why he's in there. And so I guess, it's talking about how the baby killers get no peace in jail. Basically, all the other inmates are going to give you hell. That's just, it's like a thing. It really is a thing. Or like, pedophiles. Stuff like that. With these cellmates out of the picture, Hector began anew his campaign to make Steve pay for his crime. So Hector is like, as we learned in a previous video, Hector is one of the inmates in like their jail pod or whatever, who kind of like rules the roost and like calls the shots. Like he's like the bully of their pod in the prison. Hector began anew his campaign to make Steve pay for his crime. Unfortunately, Chris still shared the cell with Steve. On Monday, when Chris was sleeping, Hector began to bang on the bars of the cell. Privacy was an illusion in jail, especially during times when they weren't locked down. But even if the door to a cell was open, when you did not walk in uninvited, and if the inhabitants were asleep, you left them alone. Steve and Chris both sat up in bed at the sound of Hector playing a xylophone across the front of the cell with the legs of a bridge chair. "Oh," he said, grinning when he saw them. "Were you guys sleeping?" "Jesus," Chris said, swinging his legs off the bunk. "What is with you?" "No, Professor," Hector said. "What's with you?" He leaned across the threshold, his breath still stale with the night. "Guess now it makes sense. You compare notes?" Chris rubbed his eyes. "What the hell are you talking about?" Hector leaned in even closer. "How long did you think it would take me to find out that you killed the girl? 'Cause she was having your kid." "You motherfucker," Chris said, his hands flying of their own volition around Hector's neck. Behind him, he could feel Steve pulling at his shoulder, but he shook him off easily, putting all his strength and all his concentration into strangling the asshole in front of him who'd spoken such a filthy lie. It did not occur to him to wonder how this information had become public knowledge. Perhaps Jordan had mentioned it to the nurse, and an inmate had been washing the floors outside the medical office at the time. Maybe a guard had overheard. Maybe it had been leaked into the papers, which were available for the inmates in the day room. "Chris," Steve said, the voice floating thin over his shoulder. "Let go." And suddenly, Chris could not stand the fact that everyone in this hellhole would be lumping him together with Steve. There was a huge difference between hanging with Steve because Chris wanted to and hanging with Steve because there was no one else. Hector's eyes were bulging, his cheeks puffed and eggplant purple, and Chris did not think he'd ever seen anything so beautiful. And then all of a sudden, his arms were wrenched behind his back and handcuffed, and he'd been driven to his knees by a blow to the neck. Hector, restrained by another officer, was getting back his color and his wind. "You little fuck," he shouted. Chris was dragged out of the pod. "I'm going to get you for this." It was not until Chris reached the control desk that he managed to ask where they were going, and even then he didn't get an answer. "You act like an animal," the officer said. "You get treated like one." He led Chris to the isolation cell. Before the officer unlocked the handcuffs, he checked beneath the mattress. There was no pillow. Without another word, the officer freed Chris's hands and left him alone. "Hey," Chris said, rushing towards the door. Solid metal except for the slat where his food tray would be passed in. He stuck his fingers through the slat. "You can't do this to me. You have to have a DR for me." From somewhere down the hall, he could hear laughter. He sank down on the floor and turned around bleakly. He would have his disciplinary review eventually, he supposed, sometime after he'd served his punishment. In the meantime, he was stuck in the hole for God knew how long, and the small cell had not been cleaned up from its last inhabitant. There was a puddle of vomit in the corner, and feces smeared on one of the walls. Chris sprang up, stretching to reach along the 3-inch ledge at the top of the shower, just to see if anyone had left something behind. He scrabbled beneath the mattress and the nailed-down bunk to no avail. Then he settled back in his original position, huddled against the door, his knees drawn up to his chest, gagging with every breath. At 12:15, his lunch was shoved through the door. At 2:30, the maximum security inmates went to the exercise room, passing the isolation cell. One of them spat through the slot, mucus streaking across the back of Chris's shirt. At 3:45, when the medium security men came to the exercise room, Chris took off his shirt and slid it under the door, a flat fabric puddle. He waited for someone to fall onto it as the thunder of feet passed by, and then carefully drew back the shirt. Someone, Steve, he supposed, had tossed him a pen. He tried to draw on the walls, but the ink didn't take to the cinder block, or to the metal bunks or shower stall, which left only one thing. For the next 3 hours until dinner time, Chris drew on his prison-issue pants and shirt, wild designs that reminded him of Emily's artistic doodling. After dinner, he lay on his back and ran through every practice relay his coach had ever written on the locker room chalkboard. He crossed his arms over his chest and pictured his blood coursing from heart to artery to vein. When he heard the squeak of crepe-soiled shoes outside, he was certain that he'd imagined it. "Hey," he yelled. "Hey, who's there?" He tried to squint out the opening, but the angle of the metal prevented him from seeing anything. Owning his senses, he made out the roll of wheels and the slush of a mop. The custodians. "Hey," he said again, "help me." There was a definite pause in the routine swing of the mop. Chris tilted his head against the slot and then jumped back when something winged him in the temple. He scrabbled at his feet, hoping for food, but felt the unmistakably thick binding of a Bible. With a sigh, Chris crawled onto the bunk and started to read. And we're moving on to the next section. Christmas vacation began on Thursday, so Selena was extremely grateful when Miss Bertrand agreed to speak to her Wednesday afternoon. She sat uncomfortably in the small wooden chair, wondering who the hell thought this furniture was conducive to learning. Chris' heart was nearly as tall as Selena's 6 feet. Selena's 6 feet tall? I forgot about that. How could he ever have jammed his legs under a table like this? No wonder today's adolescents couldn't wait to get out of school. "I'm so glad," Miss Bertrand said, "that you called." "You are?" Selena was taken aback. In her professional career, she could count on one hand the number of people who did not look at her funny when she said she was working for a defense attorney. "Yes, I mean, of course, I've read the papers. And the very thought of someone like Chris, well, it's ridiculous. That's what." She smiled broadly as if that was enough to acquit. "Now, what is it I can help you with?" Selena extracted her ubiquitous pen and pad from her coat pocket. "Miss Bertrand," she started, "so this is a teacher, but it's not the art teacher. It's one of Chris's teachers who apparently really, really likes Chris, or liked Chris when she had him in her class. Like, big fan. Now, what is it I can help you with?" Selena extracted her ubiquitous pen and pad from her coat pocket. "Miss Bertrand," she stated, "please, Joan." "Joan, then. What we're looking for is certain information that can be presented to a jury to make the murder charge seem, as you said, ridiculous. How long have you known Chris?" "Oh, 4 years, I suppose. I had him in 9th grade English, and then I sort of knew what he was doing even in the years I did not have him. He's the kind teachers are always talking about, you know, in a good way. And then he was put in my class this year as well." "You teach honors English?" "Advanced placement," she said. "The kids take the test in May. So Chris is a good student." "Good?" Joan Bertrand shook her head. "Chris is extraordinary. He has a gift for clarity, for getting to the heart of a complicated tangle. It wouldn't surprise me if he went on to college to become a writer." or a lawyer, she added. The thought of that sort of mind just wasting for months in a jail. She shook her head, unable to continue. You're not the first person to feel that way, Selena murmured. She frowned at the filing cabinet, lettered with the alphabet. Student portfolios, Joan said. Writing folders. She leaped to her feet. I should show you Chris's. Did you have Emily Gold as a student too? Yes, Joan said. Again, another straight-A kid, but more reserved than Chris. Certainly, they were always together. I imagine the principal could even have told you that. But I just didn't know her as well as I do Chris. Did she seem depressed in class? No. Very attentive to her work, as usual. Selena looked up. Could I see her folder too? The English teacher brought back two manila leaves. Emily's, she pointed, and Chris's. Selena opened Emily's folder first. There were poems inside, none that mentioned death, and a creative writing piece fashioned like Arthur Conan Doyle's work. Absolutely nothing useful. She closed the folder and glanced up again. Did Chris seem depressed? She had to ask, although she knew what the answer would be. It was unlikely that an outsider would have noticed suicidal tendencies that were never there. Oh, good Lord, no. Did Chris ever come to you for help? Not in schoolwork. He was capable of that on his own. He asked me about colleges when he started applying. I wrote him a letter of recommendation, too. I meant personal things. Joan's brow wrinkled. I encouraged him to come to me after Emily died. I knew he'd need someone. But he didn't have a chance, she said delicately. We had a memorial here for Emily. To everyone's surprise, when Chris was asked to make a speech, he started to laugh. I forgot about that. So yeah, at Emily's memorial, I don't remember exactly what happened. I'm sure it's in a previous video. I know it is, but yeah, Chris was given a speech at Emily's memorial, and he laughed. I don't remember why. It explained it, but I don't remember what the explanation was. So somebody go back and find that and put it in the comments as to what happened at Emily's memorial that made Chris laugh. We need an investigator, an investigative type, to go back through the videos, listen and search and find and tell us in the comments what happened that day that made Chris laugh at the memorial. Selena reconsidered the wisdom of putting Miss Bertrand on the stand. Okay, sorry. We had a memorial here for Emily, and to everyone's surprise, when Chris was asked to make a speech, he started to laugh. And then it says, Selena reconsidered the wisdom of putting Miss Bertrand on the stand. Of course, knowing Chris the way I do, I chalked it all up to stress. That's true. Don't we all laugh sometimes when we're just like... I know for me, when I am stressed beyond the point of like giving a fuck, because all the fucks have been given, and you're so stressed that you literally have nothing left in you to like be upset about, because you've already, like, it's already pushed you past the limit of being upset, that you can't do anything but laugh. Y'all been there? I've been there. That's usually where I end up. If you relate, put it in the comments if you relate to that. Of course, knowing the way Chris I do, knowing knowing Chris the way I do, I chalked it all up to stress, she said, clearly uncomfortable with the recollection. Joan reached for Chris's folder and opened it in front of Selena. I told the teachers who were gossiping about it to read this, she said, slapping her palm against an argumentative essay. Any mind with this much promise wouldn't be a party to murder. Selena didn't really agree, having met her fair share of intelligent criminals, but she politely glanced down at the essay. The assignment said to come down on one side of a sensitive issue, Joan explained, to present convincing evidence for that side, and then to dismiss the alternative point of view. This is something, you know, that most college graduates can't even do. But Chris pulled it off beautifully. Chris's paragraphs were neatly aligned, justified by the computer printer. In conclusion, Selena read, being pro-choice is a misnomer. There is not really an issue of choice at all. It is against the law to cut short someone's life, period. To say that a fetus is not a life is to split hairs, since all major bodily systems are in place at the time most abortions are undertaken. To say that it is a woman's right to choose is also unclear, because it is not only her body but another's as well. In a society that stands behind the best interests of a child, it seems strange indeed. Selena lifted her head and let a white grin split over her face. Merry Christmas, Mrs. Bertrand, she said. We're going to move on to the next section. I'm not commenting on that. It seemed archaic to offer a Bible as comfort. In a world where a vial of crack would probably have been preferred to 2 to 1. But Chris found himself entranced. He had never really read the Bible. For a brief stint, he'd gone to Sunday school, but that was because his father insisted on belonging to the local Episcopal church for the social statement it made. Eventually, they stopped attending with the exception of holidays, when one was most likely to be seen. The familiar quotations leaped out at him, making Chris feel as if he'd populated the small cell with old friends. Ask and you shall receive. Seek and you shall find. Knock and it shall be opened to you. He stared at the heavy door, not bloody likely. Knock and it shall be opened to you. He stared at the heavy door, not bloody likely. Motherfucker. Bitch! Whew. Thank fucking God. When the lights went out, no warnings up here, just a misty darkness, Chris rolled off the bunk and got to his knees. The floor was freezing beneath the thin cotton of his pants, and in the new dark, the smell of the shit on the wall seemed suddenly stronger, but he managed to knot his hands together and bow his head. Now I lay me down to sleep, he whispered, feeling very, very young. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. He furrowed his brow, trying to remember the rest of it, but couldn't. I haven't done this in a long time, Chris said, feeling foolish. I hope you can hear me. I don't blame you for putting me in here, and I probably don't deserve any favors. He let his voice trail off, thinking of what he most wanted. Surely, if he only asked for one thing, he had a fighting chance of getting it. I want to pray for Hector, he said softly. I pray that he gets out of here soon. Chris wondered whether God had met Emily yet. He closed his eyes, imagining the long blonde hair he'd wrapped around his hands like reins, the point of her chin, and the soft blue hollow of her throat, where he could touch his lips to her pulse. He remembered something he'd read that night. A new heart also I will give you, and a new spirit I will put within you. He hoped now Emily had that. As he drifted off to sleep, still kneeling on the floor like a penitent, Chris heard God. He came on the sounds of footsteps, of key turns, and disembodied whistles. And he murmured, stirring the fine hairs on the back of Chris's neck, "Forgive, and you shall be forgiven." Next section. Gus was awakened by a heavy object falling across her chest. Startled, she began to fight her way out, only to realize that it was Kate pinning her. "Get up, Mom," she said, her eyes shining. Her smile so infectious that Gus momentarily forgot waking meant she'd have to get through another day. "What?" she asked groggily. "Did you miss the bus?" "There is no bus," Kate said. She sat up, cross-legged. "Come on downstairs." She poked under the covers, receiving a grunt from her father. "You too," she said, and ran from the room. 10 minutes later, Gus and James walked into the kitchen, dressed and bleary-eyed. You want to start the coffee? Gus asked, or should I? You can't start the coffee, Kate said, bouncing in front of them. She grabbed each of their hands and drew them toward the shoji screen that separated the kitchen from the living room. Ta-da! She trilled, stepped away to reveal a scraggly, potted eucalyptus tree, hastily decorated with a handful of glass balls and ornaments. Merry Christmas, she sang, and wrapped her arms around her mother's waist. Gus glanced at James over Kate's bowed head. Sweetheart, she heard herself say, did you do all this? Kate nodded shyly. I know it's kind of dorky, the tree from the foyer and all, but I figured if I cut down something outside, you'd be pretty bummed out. Gus had a fleeting image of Kate pinned beneath a fallen pine. This is lovely, she said. Really. The Christmas lights, small and winkling, The Christmas lights, small and winking, were on a timer. They faded in and out, reminding Gus of the ambulance parked outside the hospital when she was summoned for Chris. Kate walked into the living room and happily settled herself beneath the small tree. I figured you guys weren't around enough, with everything that's been happening, to decorate. She held out a package to Gus and another to James. Here, she said, open them. Gus waited while James unwrapped a new daytimer calendar and a faux alligator skin cover. Then she tore away the wrapping paper from her own gift, a pair of jade earrings. Gus stared at Kate, still beaming, and wondered whether her daughter had been to the mall. She wondered when her daughter had decided that at all costs she was going to celebrate a normal Christmas. Thanks, honey, Gus said, hugging Kate close, and she whispered into the shell of her ear, for everything. Then Kate sat back down again, expectant. Gus fisted her hands in the pockets of her robe and glanced at James. So she's like, motherfucker, you better act happy. Their other kid, Kate, who's, I'm not sure how old she is, but she's younger-ish, is like trying to give them gifts and have like a happy Christmas or whatever. And so Gus is, of course, trying to do her best to, make Kate feel good about what she's doing for them. And she's like looking over at James with her fist in her pocket, like, motherfucker. Y'all know. Yeah, you've done that. Gus fisted her hands in the pockets of her robe and glanced at James. How did you tell your 14-year-old you'd completely forgotten about Christmas this year? Your present, she announced extemporaneously, isn't quite ready yet. The smile fell away from Kate's face in degrees. It's being sized for you, Gus said. A wall went up between them, solid and unforgiving for all its transparency. What is it? Kate asked. Unwilling to lie any further, Gus turned to her husband, who only shrugged. Kate, Gus pleaded, but her daughter was already on her feet and accusing. You don't have anything for me at all, do you? She said thickly. You're lying. She flung her arm out toward the eucalyptus. If I hadn't done this lame Christmas thing, you would have just moped around all day like you always do. Things are different this year, Kate. You know that with what's happening to Chris. I know that because of what happened to Chris, you don't even know I'm around. She grabbed the earring box out of Gus's hand and threw it against the wall. What do I have to do to make you see me? She cried. Kill someone? Gus slapped Kate across the face. A heavy shock settled over the room. The only sound the faint hiss of the lights as they glowed and faded. Kate, palm pressed against her burning cheek, whirled and ran out of the room, trembling, cradling her hand as if it did not belong to her. Gus turned to James. Do something, she begged. He stared at her for a moment, then nodded, and walked out of the house. And we're going to end. This was reading 18. I forgot to announce that at the beginning of the video, but this was reading 18. So we're going to end reading 18 there. I'm trying to think if there was anything that I should discuss about that, but I think that everything that just happened is pretty self-explanatory. So, you know, it's their first Christmas. It's as a family. So Kate is, if we've forgotten, Kate is Chris's little sister who is 14. It just reminded us there that she's 14. And she's feeling, you know, basically Gus and James, the parents, are going through hell. Everybody's going through hell because Chris is awaiting trial in jail. They've lost Emily, right? And so Kate is trying to, like, at least have a good day on Christmas. And so she, like, gets this tree ready and, like, gets her parents gifts and, you know, makes them come down to the living room, wakes them up, whatever, on Christmas, and is, like, super excited trying to do this, like, sweet thing for them. And then she realizes that they forgot that it's Christmas because they're going through hell, right? And so that's basically what just went down. And we're going to end it there. I'm just so happy to be back doing this. Like, I really, really missed it, and I love doing it, and I love you guys, and I love that you're here listening to this and that you care about this and that. Hopefully you enjoy book clubs as much as I do. Thank you for being here today. I love you so much. I will see you in the next video for reading 19. Have a wonderful day.
How y'all feel out there?
I'm light years, call me eons. When the snare kick in, the beat is neon. Lights, yeah, I'm feeling magnificent. Care less what I'm up against.